Good morning and welcome to another FasTrax webinar. This is a weekly event we do every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we go over various topics of the FasTrax software. You can see a list of these events if you go to our website, goftx.com, choose the FTX Lifeline tab at the top of the page, scroll down just a bit and look for that webinar button, choose that. And then from here, you'll see a list of all of their previous events that you can choose the view recordings, a list of all of our upcoming events where you can register for the upcoming webinars, and the option to subscribe to the newsletter for upcoming webinars and other FasTrax news. Today, we're going over part 2 of a 2-part session covering the point of sale settings. So let's jump right in. So I'm going to log into the point of sale as a manager. And I'm going to go to my actions, settings, and pick up where we left off last. If you didn't watch last week's session, that's where we covered the receipt settings, the scanner settings, the display settings, and the register settings. So we're going to choose the other settings here, and we're going to jump right in. So the general settings here, these are going to have to do with a lot of your register Z settings. So whenever you end your shift. So if you have the checkbox checked, that means in this scenario true. And if it's unchecked, it's false. That's the verbiage I'm going to be using here. So if the reg Z show departments is true, then what that will do is on the Z tape that prints out from the receipt printer, whenever you end your shift, it will show the department totals, as in like what each department sold for that shift. If the reg Z blind is set to true, then the cashier, whenever they end their shift, they're not going to see anything at all. It's going to end the shift and it's going to print out from the receipt printer a little slip of paper that has the shift number, and that's it. The reg Z show department groups, that directly coincides with the reg Z show departments. If that is set to true, then it will show the department group totals, one level above your departments. Reg Z force close suspend sale, if that is set to true, then the cashier, if they have any suspended sales under their register and shift, then they can't actually end their shift until those sales are closed out. You'd want to go to your resume setting, the resume sale option, resume those sales, either finish those transactions with their applicable customers or cancel or void those transactions off. Disable time clock, if that is set to true, then what that will do is that will disable the built-in time clock feature of the software. That's generally toggled to true if you are utilizing like a third-party time clock system and you don't want to confuse the cashiers. The next option, print sheet on the clock in, clock out. What that will do is whenever you're printing, whenever you clock in or clock out using the built-in time clock system, it will print a little slip of paper from the receipt printer. That will let the employee know they have a physical copy, a physical representation of when they clock in and when they clock out. The next option, time clock prompt for out type. If that is set to true, then whenever you clock in and clock out, it's going to prompt what type of shift is this? As in, like, is it vacation time? Is it standard work time? Is it sick time? Is it holiday time? Basically, it's going to prompt the cashier for the time clock type. And then you have the default time clock type. If that is set to true, then whenever you clock out, what is going to be the default setting in place, which will 99% of the time be standard. Force a starting till. If that is set to true, then whenever you start a shift, it's going to force the cashier to enter a starting till. They're going to have to enter some kind of value and a description for that starting till to signify that that's what their drawer begins with. Unique cashier per Z. If this is set to true, then once a sale has been rung up under a particular employee, whoever is logged in on the point of sale, no one else can actually use that register for sales until that shift is ended. So until that register Z button, that end shift button is pressed. That's going to make each shift, each Z, tied to one cashier and one cashier only, which helps keep track of any kind of negative actions, any kind of variances. You know exactly who would and where that come from. Use recon buckets in Reg Z. If that is set to true, then on your Z tape that prints out, it's going to utilize your actual reconciliation buckets rather than the tender types themselves. So like you won't see Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex. You would see credit cards. It's going to lump those together. Detail logging, that is where all actions in the point of sale is logged to a text file that is used for general troubleshooting if there's a problem. That's by default turned off. Force time clock before using POS. If that is set to true, then before you can do any action in the point of sale, ring any customers up, do any pay-in, payouts, etc., it's going to force the cashier to clock in using the built-in time clock. Force authorization on all time clock entries. If that is set to true, then whenever you clock in, clock out, it's going to prompt for your employee number and or fingerprint, your biometrics, no matter what. If that is turned off, then there is a couple minute grace period whenever you log into the register, it'll let you clock in and clock out. But if that's toggled on, it's going to force you to reauthorize even if you log in and then try clocking in 2 seconds after logging in. Allow manual time clock entry. This allows the cashier to manually enter a time entry without using their biometrics. And then there's the use biometric reader. If that is set to true, then you can choose what type of biometric reader you're utilizing. Verify checks. If that is set to true, then you have the option of positive or negative. Now, positive means that in that check file that is set up in Director, you're going to be accepting only those particular customers that's in that check file. Any customer saying that is not in there, you don't accept. If it is set to negative, then what that does is whenever you are ringing a check, using a check as a tender for a transaction, any customer that's in that list will not be able to pay using a check. Those are the negative files, the known bad check writers. The next two directly coincide with each other. There's the house account vendor and the print house account invoices. This will be whenever you have to print it like an actual physical, like full letter size invoice for a customer and they're a house account. And it could be for like transporting liquor across state lines or something. If they need like something more than just your standard receipt, this would be a way to print an invoice for a transaction. You would basically choose your whatever vendor you're known as to them, and then you would choose automatic, which that would mean anytime that customer uses that house account, it's going to automatically print them that invoice, or the manual, where you have to press a button, which is under the launch module button type. And then you have the number of receipts that are going to be printed. All right, so below that, you have your terawatts. This will be, of course, if you're utilizing the integrated scale and you're using weighted pricing. As a note, you can have more than one. You can put in like, here's 1 ounce. I can put a comma to separate that, 2 ounces, 3 ounces, 4 ounces, so on and so forth. You can just use a comma to separate those particular values. The next two have to do with performance and keeping receipts in the archive. By default, they're going to be set to 3 and 30. The days of live receipts, what that is that's going to be whenever you use the reprint receipt button, it's going to show the last 3 days that you can reprint those receipts in that list. Now, of course, you can always reprint those receipts using Director in the eJournal report, but this is a way to print these directly from the point of sale. Now, after 3 days, it's going to move those receipt files to the archive, and that's where it's going to keep those physical archived files in a particular directory for 30 days. If you have that set to 45 days, it would keep it for 45 days. Just know that on both of these, that's going to impact for performance. The more you keep, the more storage will be used, the more processing power that would be used by your computer. Break up inventory. If this is toggled on, whenever you do a return on, let's say, 10 packs and that's linked to a purchase unit, it will then roll that up to a purchase unit. So you're returning a carton. Enable online pending transfers. That enables the online pending transfers option in the point of sale. This would be directly tied to Director. If that is turned on, I'd highly suggest you watch the online pending transfers webinar that goes over this process of enabling that and how it actually functions. The save quantity when printing labels. If you're printing labels from the print label module in the point of sale using the button or the price check screen, if you have the save quantity checked, as in set to true here, then it's going to save that quantity each time you print. So if you have it set for 5, the next time you scan a product that you want to print a label for, it's going to have 5 as the label quantity. And then lastly, there's prompt on exit. This is a newer setting. If this is set to true, then whenever you log out of the POS, you of course have the login screen and the exit option. If you choose exit, it's going to prompt for manager authorization. So not just anybody can actually close the point of sale if this is toggled on. It's going to require a manager to close the point of sale, whether it be their employee number and password or biometrics. The reason this is a good setting to have is a setting we talked about last week, the Auto Z register. If you have that set to true, then of course it can't function if the POS is actually closed. So if your normal lower level cashiers can't actually close the point of sale, then of course it's always open, so it can auto Z if you have that setting set to true. Next will be the tax bucket for flat tax rates. If you have a flat tax assigned to your POS flag, you can assign it to one of the 8 tax rates. And then if you have any occupational taxes, that kind of depends on the county that you're in, you can assign a particular tax group for that as well. The next column over here is going to be your corporate settings. If you're in a single store environment without a corporate, then you would make sure that's set to false. If you are in a multi-store environment with a corporate server, you'd want to make sure that is set to true. Here's where your corporate server IP address will go. That is generally going to be the public IP address, but if you're on a virtual private network, that could also be its private IP address. And then here's the store's IP address, the store that you are currently at. Anytime you update these values, either one or both, make sure you choose the Update Exporter INI hyperlink here. That will update Exporter as well, so that it knows that those changes for the IP addresses can be applied. Next is the coupon tenders. There's a managed tender mapping. If you're not sure of what that actually does, there's a webinar that covers that. I would suggest you watch the Manage Coupon Tender Mappings webinar. Simply put, that allows you to manage manufacturer codes on their physical coupons to a specific tender type. So if you want to see how many Altria coupons you've taken in a time period or how many RJ Reynolds or Imperial, you can do that. Then there's the scanned store coupon tender ID and manufacturer coupon ID. These are going to be IDs that you create in the tenders area. And the reason you'd want to use these is if you want to differentiate between a scanned coupon versus a manually entered coupon by the cashier. This allows you to do so. You would just simply create that scanned coupon tender ID and then enter that new ID here for each of the applicable choices. If you're using the built-in gift card system, this is where the gift card server IP address would be. That's handled the exact same way as your corporate IP address. That could be public or private depending on your situation. If that has a SSL certificate, you have the option to set that value as true. You can allow the manual gift card entry. Now, if you have the manual gift card entry enabled, what that does is that allows the cashier to manually enter in the gift card number whenever they're making a sale or tendering a gift card. If that is set to false, then it's going to force you to scan that gift card. It doesn't allow you to manually do that. If the print gift card on receipt paper printer is set to true, then in lieu of actual physical plastic gift cards, it will print out the gift card barcode and value on the receipt. So your receipt printer is going to be utilized for that particular option. Then there's the news and announcements interval. Every so often, the system's going to reach out and check for any kind of news and announcements. This is how many minutes that will occur. All right, going to the next area, the actions. This is a very, very simple option. If you have a custom action enabled, you can put in a caption. I can call this, for example, reconciliation. And then for the file, this is going to be the file path you want to open. So if I put in like my file path and I put in the FasTrax reconciliation standalone program, and I save that, then whenever first and foremost, that will add a button to this screen here under your actions. So whenever you're on your POS screen and you go to actions, there's going to be a new button here. And whenever you press that, it's simply going to open that application. That could be a FasTrax program, that could be like Microsoft Outlook, that could be a web browser. Basically, any file on the computer, you can designate to where it can be opened directly from this actions page. You have the option to add 3 of those. All right, so the next area is going to be the credit card information. If the machine is totally unintegrated with credit cards, you can choose this register is unintegrated. Then you have your 4 options. There's the DataCap NetiPay option. There's the Heartland option for integrated HeartSIP, the Mercury option, and the GK software option. Now we're going to mainly touch on these settings down here. For details on the options here, there's a separate webinar that goes over credit cards and details. I'd suggest you watch that. So this first block of where it says do not print, this is going to be on any secondary credit card receipts. So in our first session, we covered credit card receipts. Under receipts here, there is the number of credit card receipts you can choose to print. This directly coincides with these options here. On any secondary receipt, you have the option to not print like header information, item detail, footer information, age verification, barcodes, logos, signature lines, things like that. That will significantly shorten those extra receipts that are printed conserving paper. And that's its entire purpose. Is for secondary receipts, you generally don't need that information. Now there's the option to do not automatically prompt for a card swipe. That's where you then have to choose the action button to prompt for a credit card swipe whenever you are using the credit card button. There's the do not show manual entry button on credit card authorizations. That's where you can no longer manually enter in a credit card number. Either the card is read by the card reader or that card can't be used. There's the required minimum sale amount of X dollars. Let's say we have 5 here. That means that you can't use a credit card unless the minimum subtotal is at least $5. There's the require manager override for manual entry amounts greater than X dollars. That's going to be if you have the manual button enabled for your credit cards and a customer has a transaction where their card is not read, then any value, let's say over $25 here, would be usable, but a manager has to override that. So a cashier from $24.99 and below, they can manually enter in the credit card number and the expiration date and stuff to manually authorize that credit card. But anything greater than $25, they can't. It's going to require a manager permission to do that. And then there's the option to disallow partial authorizations. And what that does is exactly what it says. If a customer comes in, they're trying to make a purchase on a card, and their card doesn't have the full funds to cover that transaction, it doesn't partially authorize that and then give them the remaining balance due. It's going to just totally not take any money out of their account and say that that card was declined. The next area will be apply credit card fee. You have the option of doing a flat fee or a percentage of the transaction. Here's where you put in that flat dollar amount or the percentage, and you tie that to a department. And then there's the pre-authorizations option, and that's going to only be available on the HeartSIP. For more information on that, I'd suggest you watch the webinar that covers credit cards. The next area will be our loyalty settings. There are technically 3 loyalty types in addition to the none, the integrated, which every POS has, the enhanced option, which covers the enhanced loyalty, and then the cloud option, which is the Loyal and Save. Both enhanced and cloud, Loyal and Save, are premium modules. For more information on those, reach out to our team and we'd be happy to give you details on that. Now, if you have these enabled, then you have the below settings that you can change. So the default timeout, that's going to be if for whatever reason you're trying to look up a loyalty customer and there's no internet access at either the store or corporate. It's going to time out after trying for a certain amount of time. So by default, it's 60 seconds. It will try for a total of 1 minute before it then fails. If you have that set for 10 seconds, then it'll only try for 10 seconds. Generally, that should be a pretty much instant response. If you're utilizing a loyalty card, here's where you enter in what that card begins with. So I could put in like LNS for Loyal and Save. And that card, that scan ID length for that particular card could be maybe 14 digits long. So the system knows if I scan anything that starts with LNS and it's 14 digits in length, that's not a barcode for a product. That's going to be a loyalty card. There's the tender ID for open redeems. That's where whenever on Loyal and Save, if I have points that I want to redeem in transaction as cash, what tender ID is that going to be tied to? I can create a Loyal and Save redemption tender ID in Director, and then assign that ID here in the point of sale. So below that, we have the option to enable old Ohio licenses. When it comes to driver's license, there's a national standard on their barcode, so every state should be handled the same way. Some states, they did not abide by that. Their data is different in the barcode. So Ohio is one of those states. If you enable the old Ohio license, that will then decipher the older style barcodes that the state of Ohio uses. There's the print balance and receipt. It does exactly that. It will print out your balances that you have points on your receipt. There's the disable manual account lookup when redeeming. That directly coincides with the manual account lookup. If that is enabled, then what that does is you can no longer manually search for a customer. You have to scan a license, a barcode. You have to scan something to identify that particular customer and not manually enter that. If the above setting, the disable manual account lookup when redeeming is set, then that means that customer, if you look them up manually, they can't redeem any points. That way you can't have a particular employee that may look someone up who has a lot of points and redeem that customer's points for themselves. There's the require email address when adding customer. With Loyal and Save, it's going to require one or the other. You have the option to require both or one or the other. So when adding a new customer to the point of sale, you have to either have an email address or have a phone number. Then when you're searching for customers, this drop-down is what's going to be utilized. You have the option to have that default search option be the phone number, the last name, or the email address. There's the option to remember last search type. If you change from that particular search type, then if this is set to true, it will remember the last one used. So you can have a last name set as the default. In a transaction, you change that to phone number. Well, then the next time in that POS session, the next time you search for another loyalty customer, it will remember that the phone number was the last used. And then finally, there's the show middle name setting. It does exactly that. If the customer has a middle name that's tied to their account, it will show that middle name. That's very handy when it comes to identifying if you're doing a name search and there's 20 John Does. You can see who John Doe is by actually using their middle name. And lastly, that we're going to cover today is going to be our reconciliation settings. Now, if the shift reconciliations are set to blind, that means the cashier can no longer see what they're supposed to have in their register settings. They can see what they enter, but they can't see what their system thinks they should have and what variances those should be. That directly coincides with the print blind option. If that print blind is set to true, then they can't print that out after completing either. They won't know after they print if there's any variance. The next two settings, shift recon deposits are editable and safe drops are editable. If those are set to true, that allows you to edit the deposit field and the safe drops field. If that is set to false, then of course, those fields are going to be using the static values that the system thinks they should be. The shift recon enable lottery, if that is set to true, then of course that will add in the lottery reconciliation portion to the shift reconciliation process. Lottery uses multiple Z's. If that is set to true, that's going to be where multiple shifts are going to be consolidated into one lottery reconciliation. If that is set to false, then each shift is expected to reconcile their lottery after every end of shift, basically after the Z button's pressed. For more details on that and reasons why you may or may not do that, I'd suggest you watch the lottery reconciliation webinar. Lottery uses safe. That's where if you want to utilize the safe functionality in the lottery reconciliation, it will then enable the safe where you can keep track of books and games in the safe. Lottery lock starting ticket number, if that is set to true, then whenever you do a lottery reconciliation, you can no longer edit the starting ticket number. Use department loyalty coupon. That's where if you want to have a department dedicated to loyalty coupons, you can do so. You can map that particular department to any kind of loyalty redemptions. Hardcode starting till. If you have this set, then that does exactly that. It will hardcode a starting till value to where it's always the same for the store, and the cashiers then no longer have to enter a starting till. If you're using this, I'd suggest you turn off the force starting till option and then remove the starting till button from the point of sale. Show cycle counts variance and daily recon report. If that is set to true, it does exactly that. If there's a cycle count done for that particular day during that shift, then it will show the variance in that daily reconciliation report. On RegZ show recon, if it does exactly that, once again, on your register Z, it will show the reconciliation data. Auto-populate credit card debit totals and shift recons. Once again, it does exactly what it says. If that's set to true, then on your shift and reconciliation, that field for credit card and debit card is no longer editable. It's going to be pre-populated. Then you have your lottery ticket sorting direction. Are your games descending, going from like ticket 100, 99, 98, or are they ascending, going from tickets like 1, 2 to 3? Then you have the option to where you want to get your payouts from. Are you pulling that from a department or a payout account? The next option is sorting your lottery games. You want to sort that by bin number, which is the most common, or by lottery game number. And then you have your lottery department information. Are you pulling that, your pay-in and payouts from your departments or your payout accounts? If you're doing from department or payout accounts, you have to designate what that will be here. And then, of course, your sales department numbers will be right above that. And then lastly, there's the Manage Lottery Games option. This is going to be only mappable at store level. This allows you to map lottery tickets to specific bins and whether they're active or not. Okay, so I hope everybody learned something new today. Once again, these webinars, they happen every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can see a list of these events if you go to our website, goftx.com. Choose that FTX Lifeline button at the top of the page. Scroll down just a bit and look for the webinar button. Choose that, and that page will show you the list of webinars that you can watch the recordings of, new webinars to register for, and then the option to subscribe to the newsletter. If you have any questions on this topic, let us know at websupport@FasTraxPOS.com. And if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, let us know at info@goftx.com. Thank you, and have a great weekend.